Welcome to continued lesson 3 materials. We just went through oil. Now we're going to discuss your kit. You need a sharpening kit. There are several out there, as I mentioned in a prior lesson: Gatco, Ruixen, Smith, Lansky, a few other off-brand names. For the purpose of these lessons, we're going to use a Gatco system, which is mine, which looks basically like this. Real simple kit. Most importantly, primarily, you have your jig. This is called the jig right here. This allows you to hit those angles I mentioned in a prior lesson. You're going to need to be able to hit 11 degrees, 15 degrees, all the way up to 30. Sometimes you can go a little more shallow. Sometimes you can go more steep. You see, I have a notch in here for 35 degrees. On rare occasions, I need a 35. I've been using this jig for many hundreds of knives, so you can see it's kind of worn and used. On the edge, I get really shallow. It's worn off sometimes right here. I'm currently sharpening a knife that I'm making a special order for someone, a handmade, completely, homemade knife. So it's a 1/4 inch thick. So I've got the jig set on the big step right here for holding the thicker knife. Most of your knives, 3/32, 1/8 down there, will be much shallower. So that's your jig. Most of them are made out of aluminum or heavy plastic. Be careful you don't bend this or step on it or mess it up, because that'll mess up your angles on either side. Got to keep your jig straight. You can see the bigger knobs here is for doing bigger jobs. There are also smaller knobs for your standard knives, 1/8, 3/32 kitchen knives, really thin stuff. You use these two to hold your jig together and to bind. I'm using the big ones right now. The jig usually fits in a Gatco kit like this, a Lansky kit. It sits differently. Of course, I have my oil, which you always have to have. The oil doesn't fit inside of here, of course. The old Gatco bottle used to be here, which I eventually wore out, and I started using this one because it holds a bit more and it's got a smaller lid on it. Starting at the top, the stones. This is your serrated stone. Looks pretty simple, just like it sounds. It's for serration, and these stones drink up a lot of oil always, so every now and then I'll put some more oil on them, make sure it's always soaking up. You should have a little bit of oily residue on your stones at all times. We will discuss later how to sharpen serrated edges. I've got more equipment for doing serrated edges. That's your serration stone right there. You can see it's got a nice V pattern. You can do coarse serration, which is big scallops. You can do fine serration, which is narrow scallops. Pretty easy. Starting at the top, below your serration, is your coarse or your ultra coarse stone. You always start out with your coarse stone to set that initial facet. You can see here I've got one facet on the end, that long, curved, smooth, clean surface. That didn't used to be that way. It didn't used to be there at all. That knife originally looked like this. A small edge, way too steep, cut on a grinder. Probably messed up the temper and the grain in the metal because it was done at high speed, which overheated the metal, messed up the temper. But for the lessons here, we're going to start with a coarse stone, which we'll use to get that first facet. You have to lay your first facet down with the coarse stone. After the coarse stone, you go to a medium. In this case, it's diamond. It cleans up all the scratches from your prior stone, which is a coarse stone, smooths out that surface a little bit to get it smoother and smoother towards looking like that. And of course, after that, you go to your fine stone, which is diamond in this case, even smoother. After you finish the smooth diamond stone, your kit may or may not stop here or around that area, but I go up to a ceramic. This is 1200 ceramic stone, which means for every linear inch, there's 1,200 points. If you look at a microscope with this in a linear inch, I do have a small microscope, there'll be 1,200 little points, and that will smooth out your knife to make it really slick like that, and make a razor sharp scalpel's edge, which will slice through anything. Looks nice and clean, nice and smooth. Pretty simple for that. Once you get past this stone, if you really want to get advanced and start working on later, you can move out to leather stropping, or strapping, depending on how you pronounce it. This is the Pakistani model, which I kind of prefer myself. You see it's got a heavy canvas one side, the back side of rawhide, the front side of rawhide. And we'll discuss strapping or stropping later, which I do for making really good jobs. Personally, I shave my face with a straight razor, and I finish my straight razor up with this. A good friend made me this, which is another stropping board. You can use this board to polish out and get the final burr off your knife right there. These are real good also. You can make these pretty cheap. Sometimes a friend will make one. You just get some hippie leather, fold it over with glue, leave it pressed for a few days, let it dry. That works perfect after that. So real simple job. These are all the pieces of your basic sharpening kit. You may be missing a few pieces. You may have one extra, but Main thing, you've got oil, you have a jig, you have all your stones, and then the last step after that, if I can find mine, is something to sharpen it on, which is what I call the post. This is actually a Gatco post right here, or a quick hold handle. So when your jig is in here and you're doing stones, you have a good hold on it like that. I just took a cheap piece of wood, screwed it into the wood here, threw some rags over it and a couple rubber bands to hold the rags down for cleaning stones and wiping knives off, and it's real simple. You can do it with the post by itself. Some people don't use that, they just hold it in their hand, do their sharpening like that, whatever you want. Again, your basic implements, most importantly the oil, the jig for setting your angles and your facets, all your different stones, leather. If you get past ceramic, you want to do a really nice clean polish, scalpel sharp job, and a post to put it in while you're sharpening. We'll move on to the next lesson material shortly.